Well, hello everyone, and welcome to HIPAA Chat. My name is Carol Flagg. I'm with High Tech Answers. Hopefully, you're familiar with what we're doing here. We had debuted our first HIPAA Chat in September, and now this is our second one, and we're excited to be here. Today's topic is encryption and other measures for securing PHI. And we are going to be discussing a little bit up front about this topic and then on to the main event, which is, of course, answering your questions on this topic that you submitted during your registration. HIPAA Chat is hosted by Steve Spearman. Steve is a national thought leader in the space of HIPAA security, and has a great radio voice and webinar voice, so we're thankful for that, which is awesome. Steve, how are you today? I can't believe it.
I'm good.
Wow.
I'm good. I'm still upset that you didn't insert, the actor's face on that picture there.
I know. George Clooney.
Yeah, okay, George Clooney. You just got married. But anyway, I'll go with the radio voice. It'll have to suffice, It's,
I'm so over George Clooney now that he's married. I don't have a chance anymore. So I can't even talk about that.
I'm sorry. I touched on something sensitive.
A raw nerve.
Yeah, that's right. Okay.
We're excited to be here back for HIPAA Chat, our ongoing series, and we actually have a cohort with us today. Joining us is Rob Humphreys from eFax Corporate. Rob is also an expert and thought leader around this area of HIPAA, encryption, and compliance. He authored a blog post for us last year that was really terrific and well worth checking out, and it's linked here on the slide. You can go ahead and take a gander at that. So with no further ado,
Carol, well, wait now. Steve gets George Clooney status, and I'm relegated to cohort. That's the best I can do today.
Well,
that's like a dagger in my heart.
Well,
that's painful.
Actually, I'm kind of going with the radio voice, Bob. I think we got that good. It's like, but who's going to be the straight man and who's going to be the that's what
Rob,
that's right. We hadn't quite figured out the roles yet.
You didn't tell me that. And Rob, Steve actually shared with me up front, like his avatar was George Clooney. I didn't get any avatar from you. But next time, so you'll have to pick whoever you like. I promise I will promote you as such.
I bear a stunning resemblance to Brad Pitt.
Yeah.
I've been told once or twice.
I saw Ocean's 11. I can see that.
Yeah.
So before I turn the madness over to the Q&A, which I'm going to be moderating between our two cohorts and co-hosts, we just want to review a couple little things about this particular topic. So Steve, I'm going to turn it over to you, and then we'll be starting the Q&A shortly.
Yeah, so since our topic is encryption, we're going to cover as much ground. We had a lot of questions today. We just want to thank everybody that's on the call today for contributing, and this is by far my favorite format to do this sort of thing. I just like having discussions, but I thought it would be worth just having a couple of slides, 2 or 3 slides, kind of just reviewing some facts about the rules and about how to think about encryption in particular. And so first, talking about HIPAA, and actually I'm going to do a shameless plug here. If you go to healthsecuritysolutions.eventbrite.com, I actually promote some webinars there, and I've got actually one next Friday. And the reason I'm pointing to you there now is because in those presentations I actually kind of dive into the regulations and how to think about them. Unfortunately, in this format we don't have a lot of time for that, and that would be useful thing to do. So we're just going to really touch on them and understand that understand this more fully would be really valuable. But basically, HIPAA has 2 safeguards. A safeguard is a term I use, implementation specification, that are associated with 2 standards. The first standard is, they're both technical. The first one is access controls, and the second one is the transmission standard. Both of them have a safeguard that says, the first one's called encryption and decryption. The second one about transmission is encryption, and basically they're governing encryption of data at rest and in motion, basically in the regulations. Now the main thing to note about them is that they're both addressable safeguards. In other words, everywhere that HIPAA is mentioned in the regulations, they're designated as addressable, which means that they must be implemented if reasonable and appropriate. And we're gonna cover that in just a minute about what that means and how to think about it. But the other thing that really kind of factors in here is meaningful use. So, and the main reason I added this is because there is new language in stage 2 of meaningful use regarding encryption. But the thing to note is that meaningful use does not change the HIPAA standard, and in fact, HIPAA is referenced in the new stage 2 standard, which is for eligible hospitals is going to be core requirement number 7, and for eligible providers will be core requirement number 9. This is the security language. It also talks about risk assessment there, but basically it talks about the specific fact. It points to the specific regulations, noting that encryption is an addressable safeguard. So meaningful use doesn't change the language around that. But the main burden is on electronic health record vendors. And rather than me diving into that, we're actually going to address a few questions directly that deal with that. So I'm going to kind of go past that. We'll look at that in just a minute. The thing is, when you're thinking about reasonable and appropriate, remember that you must implement an addressable safeguard if it's reasonable and appropriate. So how do you determine whether it's reasonable or appropriate? The size of the organization and the technical capabilities of the organization, how sensitive is the data. So PHI, for example, is different than non-PHI, even though there might be other sensitive data that needs to be considered, but it's the question of whether it's PHI that really comes into play. The cost of a security measure can determine whether it's reasonable and appropriate, and then the probability and criticality of potential risk to protected health information, which is, by the way, one of the things that a risk assessment should demonstrate. So you'll go to the next slide, and basically, there we go. Yeah, I'm sorry. I know I have control there. I'm having you to do my work for me.
What else is new? No.
Yeah, I know. What else is new? That's absolutely right. So, yeah, I'm going to have to recover from that from a moment. Take a sip of water. No, so okay. So, what are some of the factors to consider, like when you're thinking about what's the risks associated with encrypting or not encrypting? And the factors are things like, what is your risk analysis finding say? I mean, because certain types of devices, classes of devices are riskier than others. A laptop is riskier than a workstation because it can run on battery. The location of the device, is it mobile? That would be a factor that comes into play. What's the physical security associated with the device? So a device that's being taken from office to office, the physical security is going to be not as good in most cases. What data is stored on the device is another component that you have to consider. So you can set up some devices where there's literally no PHI is on the device, that you've got it set up like in a virtual environment, and in that case that would reflect on whether you need to encrypt. And actually what I say is that virtualization is a reasonable alternative to doing full disk encryption. Another factor is performance. If encrypting machines dramatically affects performance, then that would weigh into and factor what you need to think about. And then, of course, I've already talked about virtualization. What alternatives to encryption are available? So that's kind of my very high-level kind of review of how to think about encryption. It is an addressable safeguard, and with that, we'll kind of get our discussion going. So.
Sorry for that. I was actually reading up on Brad Pitt and George Clooney, so I was.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. I understand that. I know how distracting they can be. So yeah.
All right. With that, we are gonna dive right into these questions. Just a reminder, we're gonna try to get through as many of these as we can from the registration, but we had close to 50, which is great news, but we will run out of time. So if we don't get to your question, please email us offline, either Steve or Rob or both, and use HIPAA Chat in the subject line. They promised to get back to you. All right, gentlemen, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, question number one. Yeah, question number one is from Diane from Tulsa, Oklahoma. Are Gmail accounts considered encrypted enough to be considered secure?
I'll take that one. Rob, is that okay? I'll sort of.
Yeah, that's fine. Fire
okay,
away,
so,
Steve.
This kind of generally falls into a category that we had a few questions around, and it's dealing with the issue of like hosting, like cloud providers. Gmail is a cloud provider, as an example. And in the answer question is it secure enough to use? So let me kind of address it this way. Gmail, the key issue isn't like the encryption as an example. It's really about, is the vendor, first question is, are they willing to sign a business associates agreement? And it used to be, I think even as recently as like about 6 months ago, the answer was no. Google would not sign a business associates agreement, and therefore that disallowed your ability to be able to use Gmail for covered entities that were sending protected health information. That has now changed. They are willing to send protected. They are willing to sign a business associates agreement, but that does not really apply to personal email accounts. It applies. You basically have to sign a contract for their enterprise services. And actually, I recently did this. I recently signed up for Google services and their enterprise, and I went through the process of signing their business associates agreement, which they co-signed automatically. And so the key question there is they are willing to sign a business associates agreement. The only other thing that I'll add is that if you're sending information from a Gmail account to a non-Gmail account, there are issues that are not, clear to me about what encryption looks like in that environment. And Rob, maybe you can even weigh in here. You might know a little bit more about that. Within the Gmail ecosystem, there's good, strong encryption. But if you're sending, let's say, a Gmail from Steve Spearman at gmail.com to Rob Humphreys at j2.com, it's not clear how that works.
Yeah, that's I was going to jump in on that, Steve, because it opens up broader questions that relate to email just in general. It's, as long as you're able to have some control and you know what security measures are in place on either side of that transaction, if you can guarantee that the information you're sending is either going to be encrypted over or sent over an encrypted session between the different servers on either side, or that for sure that you have an encrypted package that you can send as part of the email itself, so you're not sending clearly readable PHI just over the airwaves, then it's fine. But you get into these questions of, let's say that Gmail has encryption turned on, but the receiving side of it, the receiving service doesn't. In order to guarantee deliverability, they're going to go ahead and send it, and you may not even know that transaction has occurred over an unencrypted channel.
Right.
So it's always good to take a look and just be aware, especially in those cases in the wild. Am I sending this? Is there a risk for sending it potentially unencrypted, and really take a look at whether you're exposing yourself that way.
Since you guys, since Steve, you touched on the business associates, I'm going to jump down a couple questions and get to.
Hey, Carol, before let me actually kind of add something I think is good, like a good kind of thing to consider technically when thinking about encryption. Anytime, the reason encryption is under the access control standard in the rules is because it always involves a process of encrypting and decrypting, which involves a way to there are going to be some credentials involved.
All right.
So we, in a little bit, I think we'll probably touch on. I think it's worth talking a little bit about like what, Rob and I are both sort of kind of posing these what if sort of questions, but there are ways to send encrypted email consistently, and those involve using services where somebody has to sign up with the service that, hey, some of you probably have gotten an email that says, hey, this email is encrypted, and it forces you to go to a website where you have to put in credentials, and then you generally don't have to do it every time you get that email if you're using that same service, but it's just one of the factors to think about. In those cases, you've got encryption that's strongly occurring throughout from the sender to the recipient. So.
Yeah, Steve, I think where we have seen it is a couple of solutions for that. Either the one that you say, which is we're going to store the information remotely, and it's going to be in a secure environment, and we're not actually going to transmit it directly to you. We're going to have you log in through a portal and take a look at it. The other option is, plenty of email services out there that have a module that will, as we refer to, encrypt the payload itself. So
the content,
any kind of information that you're sending, but both of those do have a configuration overhead, and I think especially with the encrypted data itself that's attached to the email, there's setting up passwords, and it does pose challenges when you're dealing with just your average person on the street that just wants to get an email with some information in it. It does make things interesting.
Yeah. And we had actually a number of questions really related to this issue of encrypted email, and how do you initiate that, and who do I contact? So certainly, starting with one of those service providers is a good place to get
and
on.
let me give a couple. So there are different levels. There's some encrypted email services that are very fancy. They will look for email that contains protected health information. It'll treat it differently if it notices there's clear text PHI. One example is Proofpoint. Very good solution, and there are a number of them that are like that. And then there are more that just allow for an on-demand function to do that. And I'm trying to remember Data Motion, I think, is one where, or you can send an email that says, hey, this has PHI, I'm gonna put secure or write encrypt in the subject line, and it'll encrypt that. And then when that is received by the recipient, again, there's a process, as Rob has said, where they would then say, okay, we're going to let you look at this, but first you have to prove that this is really you. Click on this link. It takes you to a web page where you have to either put in credentials or create credentials if it's the first time you've used that service, and then it'll decrypt the data once you've kind of proven that. And so there are different levels of doing it. And what I do is, what I generally recommend depends on the amount of email that contains protected health information that the organization needs to send. Sometimes, designating a single person in the organization that is the only one that's allowed to send encrypted emails, and then allow them to do it on demand. And, in a small clinic, that might be okay. And then in a larger enterprise, you need to look at, more sophisticated tools that will actually look for PHI and treat it differently. And those both are available. Through, and there are multiple. Maybe Carol, we can do a quick follow-up. One of our follow-up items is kind of maybe a list of things that we could put together.
Yeah, that's a great idea. We can when we send to all the registrants, we'll be sending a recording of this, and we can certainly in that email put a list together, because there's quite a few questions related around that. Not quite sure. And talking about from a vendor side, Suzanne from Montpelier, Vermont, how can you obtain documentation from a vendor on whether data is encrypted or not? I mean, I guess if you just ask them, or
the first thing is ask them. They literally just ask.
Say pretty please.
Yeah, it's like
Steve, I'll jump in on this one.
Yeah, sure.
We certainly deal with this on our side quite a bit.
I'm sure.
I think it's really part of the vendor evaluation process. I mean, Steve touched on it earlier. Anytime you're doing anything with PHI, you're definitely going to want to have a vendor who is going to want to work with you and be able to provide a BAA. Certainly, if nothing else, much of those security protocols should be defined in the BAA that lists, what they have in place. But I think, generally speaking, from a best practice perspective, asking people up front, if you're not getting responses that make you feel comfortable, if they don't have ready collateral and information in hand to say to you, here's what we do, we've thought about this, we have something ready for you, you should definitely have questions. I mean, you want somebody that has considered this stuff and has really thought through it quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a good answer. I think that vendors that are really pursuing healthcare they're trying to have the dialogue, and if you get somebody that's like real resistant, or it's like you got to say, well, are you serious about healthcare? And I think it's a real good point. The thing is, the first line is like, you need to ask them if they have a business. Hey, we have a business associates agreement. Here it is. Will you sign it? And once a vendor agrees to that, then they're agreeing to kind of follow the regulations, and including things related to encryption. And for a vendor, encryption for these kinds of applications, it's certainly reasonable and appropriate. But taking it that next level and saying, hey, how are you doing this? What standards are you following is a really good part of the discussion you should be having.
Right.
Yeah, and I think especially as you scale into larger vendors, as you're having these conversations, especially in a hosted environment, ask yourself whether you are comfortable with the safeguards that they have in place. Is this something that I would have done myself? Is this something that I would have skipped if I were hosting this within my own infrastructure? And reach a comfort level based on your organization and what your risk analysis tells you and what you know about it. You don't have to just take sort of off-the-cuff assurances or go with something that you feel is going to put you at risk just because you want to go with a new vendor.
Yeah, or based just on cost alone or something, right?
Yeah, sure.
Right.
Yep.
Sort of staying on that, a couple more questions as we're sort of on this topic. How often are you seeing organizations, this is from Kevin from Denton, Texas, how often are you seeing organizations encrypt the database of their EHR or other EPHI applications?
So that was the one that I touched on at the intro. So this is the story. If you are a covered entity, and you're, let's say, an eligible provider, it could be eligible hospital, either one, and you are pursuing stage 2 of meaningful use, then it is incumbent upon your vendor to encrypt the databases in which that data resides. So if you were on stage 1, and then and then you've gone through where you got the new version of the software that is stage 2 compliant and that's certified for stage 2, then that data is supposed to be encrypted at rest. The software can give you the ability to disable that encryption at rest, but it also requires that the software would require an administrator only could disable it. So a standard user cannot, according to stage 2 certification requirements, cannot allow just an end user to decrypt, to disable encryption. So to get to, was it Kevin's question?
Yeah.
Yeah, so to get to really Kevin's questions, like if you're doing stage 2, then that data is supposed to be delivered to you encrypted. And if the vendor certified, it's one of the criteria. So it's probably safe to say that it's being encrypted. My experience, like for people that aren't at stage 2 yet, is that most stage 1 vendors are not encrypting their databases, and there are probably lots of reasons. It can be technically challenging on a number of dimensions, but it's everyone. Again, every vendor should be delivering their software encrypted with stage 2, and then you would have, as a covered entity, you could choose to disable it, but remember, you're not allowed to unless it's not reasonable and appropriate. Remember, that's how you think about the rules.
Right.
So,
being back with this was part of another question. Being behind the server behind a firewall that's still right. Still has to be encrypted.
Yeah. I mean, it's not just server. Everything should be behind a firewall, but it even thinking about. If you look at the last slide that I gave, kind of what are the factors that you think about, like, so if a server's not just behind a firewall, let's say it's in a data center, let's say it's in a certified SAES 16 certified data center. So the physical security is very good. We have like zero worry that that server is going to be stolen. We don't even worry that much about weather events because these certified data centers have multiply redundant power, internet connections, yada yada yada. But so in that case, why do we worry about encrypting the data? And really, we mostly do it because of hacking events. If somebody or could be actually an internal concern. Maybe an employee sticks a thumb drive into the USB port of that server. If the data is encrypted, you can't get at it unless you have the credentials to do it. You have to have what's called the key, which is generally tied to the credentials. So we still do care about it. One of the things that I would I've actually worked with a client, now this is prior to stage one, who actually, very large organization, about 2,000 end users, and they had actually, tested encryption, and it dramatically affected when they encrypted the databases, it actually dramatically affected the performance of the system and increased what's called latency. It's a technical term, by a factor of 4 or 5. So before when you'd click save or you'd click submit or save on that, whatever that page is, where it might have taken half a second, before, it might take 3 or 4 seconds to do that. And when you think of the number of clicks a day by 2,000 employees, in my risk analysis, I said it's not reasonable and appropriate, and so I said, they have a plan to go to a new system where they believe that they're going to be able to do it, but that would be the kind of thing like where a risk analysis would help you determine, what needs to be done in those, where the physical security is good. So.
Since we're obviously talking about storage here, no surprise we had a couple questions related to the cloud.
Yeah.
Rob, you're shocked. I can tell. I can hear it in your voice, Rob.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, maybe you can take a crack at this. This is from Alita from Norcross, Georgia, where our own Roberta Mullen lives. When PHI is stored in the cloud, do concerns around encryption and other security measures or securing measures face different obstacles, and no question, Steve just mentioned hacking, but I imagine there might be a few others.
Sure. Again, it all gets back to some of the core measures that you need to have in place just within your own infrastructure. So if you're maintaining it internally, there are certainly the access controls, both logical, so am I getting access through machines, through programs? Do I have access to the data itself? Do I have physical access? And what those access controls look like. But aside from that, in terms of encryption, I think it's really the same set of requirements that you might apply internally. So when you're going out and looking at those folks, those vendors who are out there, if they're looking to offer services within the healthcare space, they certainly should have similar programs and protocols in place that would meet your requirements. Again, taking a look at data sheets and finding a vendor that's upfront and is willing to enter into a BAA with you and sort of lay all their cards on the table and is open about it, it is probably the best thing that you can do.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a great answer. And actually, now I think we're about to enter a new chapter in our HIPAA Chat Lives. Amy from Houston, Texas, has agreed to ask her question live to our audience. And
yes!
Her question, yay! And her question is,
does Amy have a celebrity avatar?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Amy, send me your celebrity avatar, and we'll get. I'm sure, I'm sure it's Jennifer Lawrence is my guess. Her question is around text messaging. Amy, I'm going to mute you, and hopefully you're going to be there on the other end to ask your question around PHI and text messaging. Amy, are you with us? Amy?
Maybe she's muted on her end.
I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
All right. Amy, send me a chat when you're. She just sent me a question. Amy, send me a chat and we'll get back to you. Okay. While we're waiting on Amy, She might have been using a voice over IP versus calling in. That might be part of the issue. I will move on to another question, and we're going to get there. Now, this really isn't so much an encryption question, but I think it leads to that, and it's a really interesting question because it's sort of a big issue right now in telehealth and telemedicine. Skype claims to be HIPAA compliant for telemedicine and virtual visits. Is that true? That's Kimberly from Santee, California.
So hopefully the listener, Rob will be going along with, hopefully the listeners will know that the first question we would ask Skype is what? Will they sign a business associates agreement? And I don't know the answer to that. I really don't. But we can say with assurance that if they won't, that they're not. Yep. Beyond that, I mean, I don't know enough. I will say that I've run now into this question in various forms, specifically about Skype, a few times over the last few months. But the answer is if they're willing to sign a business associates agreement, then that's the first step, and presumably when they do that, they're agreeing to comply with the rules, including issues related to encryption and all that other stuff. So that's really the main thing we need to find out is will they sign a business associates agreement, and if they will, then we can begin a good faith discussion about it.
Right.
I think the other thing, just to kind of jump in and add a little more on the tail end of it, you have to remember that Skype is now supported on so many different platforms,
right?
Between desktop machines and especially in the mobile space. And so you may want to be careful. My dad works in an audiology lab. They do a fair amount of remote sessions with their patients, and they evaluated Skype and saw some concerns. As part of that evaluation process, it was a discussion around, whether their compliance was restricted to one platform or another. And so you may want to look at that. If you have folks that you think are going to be on the receiving end of it on a tablet or a phone or something like that, I might have a few questions about it.
Right. Let's see if Amy's back with us right now. She sent me a chat saying she was talking. Let's see. Amy, are you there? Amy? Nope.
I'm so disappointed.
Well, it looks like she called in. Hold on. Let's try it again. Amy, are you there? Oh, we sent her an audio pin, so I unmuted her. So she's going to call in. So I'm just going to leave her open for a second. Amy, as soon as you're on the phone, just chime on in and interrupt us. How about that?
Sounds good.
And I'll move on to
Carol, could I ask Steve maybe sort of a clarifying question?
Yeah.
We have talked quite a bit about elements that are addressable and, risk analysis findings, certainly, Steve, that you've gone through. But in these cases where, as folks are doing these sort of analyses, is the risk analysis as a document itself, from an audit perspective, enough to present to someone in the event that something should happen down the road? Or do you recommend typically that folks engage in a little more documentation in terms of what they view as reasonable and possible within their capabilities and within their environment?
So, and actually, I'm going to, get shameless plug here. My next week, the webinar, I have two. It's HIPAA 101 and I have Compliance Essentials, and I really kind of take on that question of like building a book, what I call a book of evidence. But to really answer your question directly is I got to say, if you get audited and you don't have a risk analysis, you're in deep doo-doo. Let's put it that way. Right. You will not pass your audit. It's like that. And now there may be a bunch of reasons you will not do well on your audit. But if you go look at all the fines that have been levied, I have yet to see one where a risk analysis, one of the issues was that a risk analysis wasn't done. And so there's a reason it's the first HIPAA security rule. It is the thing that gives you a basis for decision making around these kinds of issues. It's like what, and one of the things that I've used an example, I use it in the same Compliance Essentials talk, is that I say that let's imagine, for example, that you have two hospitals, one of which both of which have Windows XP, and both of which have have a breach associated with the use of Windows XP. So remember, Windows XP, there's not a rule that says you can't use Windows XP machines. There's not. But in the first scenario, Hospital A, the auditor sits in front of them and say, okay, what if you show us what you got? And they say, well, we don't have a risk analysis. We don't, we just happened and we're real sorry and yada, yada, yada. Versus Hospital B that had the same breach, but they documented the risk in their risk analysis as required by the rules. They actually had documented their decision making. They documented the steps they took to mitigate the risk. Like we repurposed these workstations to a lesser function, yada, yada, yada. And even though I can't say for sure, I think Hospital B is going to do okay because they took the risk seriously, they documented it, and they mitigated it to the degree that they can. So it's very possible Hospital B won't experience any fines, whereas Hospital A is going to be what's called willfully neglectful. And under the law, they have to be fined. They cannot avoid a fine if you're found to be willfully neglectful. Probably more answer than you wanted, Rob, but that's the risk analysis is a critical first step, but it's part of a book of evidence you want to put together.
And I actually
think the more documentation, the better.
Yeah, that's really true. And actually, the point that I'll make in the presentation that is that you need documentation that keys to each of the regulations really and the policies that you have. You need to have policies that address the regulations, and then you need some checklist forms, audits, reports, logs that kind of prove that you're actually doing what your policies say you need to be doing.
Right.
I think, gentlemen, I think we have Amy from Houston, Texas on the line. Amy, are you there?
I am. Can you guys hear me now?
We can hear you now. Hi,
Yay.
Amy. Hey, welcome to HIPAA Chat.
Glad to be here.
Oh, glad to have you.
Your presence makes me feel like a celebrity.
Yeah.
Seriously, because it's like now I'm on the radio. It's like Howard Stern's going to be calling me next.
Amy, does Jennifer Lawrence as an avatar work for you? Just checking.
It does.
It does.
J-Law.
Hopefully not one of the hacked avatars of Jennifer.
Yeah, hopefully
no, not the hacked one, right?
Yeah, let's keep it clean.
She needed to encrypt her personal information. Speaking of which, Amy, I think your question is around text messaging and PHI, and I imagine there's an encryption line in there somewhere. So go ahead and ask your question.
I am. My question is about text messaging. More and more providers are wanting to do it. It was built into EHRs, and it kind of sat dormant. Now it seems to be where they're turning it on, and I'm a little lost on whether we need business agreements and who do we need them with, and how are we actually going to do this with the text messaging?
Yeah. Let me start off, and then I'll let Rob weigh in maybe with a bit more technical stuff. So first of all, yes, one of the things I say all the time, doctors, especially doctors and patients, but doctors love text messaging. They really do. They love it. It's convenient. But when I'm helping clients, when I'm doing risk analysis, we actually have to drill down, like, how are you using it? Is there PHI involved? And the answer is that text messaging is great. It just needs to be done securely, which means it needs to be encrypted. So there are a lot of text messaging solutions available that are secure text messaging systems, and usually they can be set up a number of different ways. TigerText is one. One I really like. It's a hardware-based solution. It's called Koolspan, Koolspan. It's another one. You can get there's a free system called it's free to try, called Cortex. It's owned by a big vendor called Provider. There are lots and lots of systems out there, and generally the way it would work is that you'd continue to use whatever your personal texting solution is for family and things like that, but there will be a secure texting application that will allow you to send text securely. So big fan of texting. I would encourage you to do it. Just make sure that the texts are secure and do it securely through some sort of encryption and an application. Rob,
I think the challenge this gets into is the same thing that we discussed with email as well. So when it's relatively contained and you're aware of what is on the receiving end of that, if you're keeping it within an ecosystem, say within a provider network, and it's, you've got doctors communicating with doctors, when you open it up and you start firing off text messages to patients without any idea of what's on the other side, I think that's where you should start hearing some alarm bells go off and having some red flags.
Yeah.
So certainly the solutions that Steve has talked about are great when you can have control over it. It just
and that's actually it's a great point, and it gets to the thing that I mean, Rob, is a really good point, because it gets to the point of what I said. Anytime you're talking about encryption, there has to be a way to use keys to encrypt and then use keys to decrypt. So, if you send an encrypted text message to somebody that doesn't have the solution on their end to decrypt it, they're not going to be able to view the data, which is exactly what you want. But it's not any system that's open from a texting standpoint cannot simultaneously be secure, and so you have to look at solutions. There are solutions like CoolSpan's hardware based. So that is when you need to really confine it. But you could also, I don't know, and Rob, maybe you do, but there are probably text solutions where it says, hey, this is a secure text. You can't read it unless you go through this process, just like with email. I'd suppose that some of those work that way, and you have to.
There are individual vendors. I mean, both within healthcare and outside. You have specific messaging apps. Kik is one that's pretty popular, but that is not secure, so I don't want anybody to go out and start installing that and using it necessarily. But it's, they have a network that is dedicated, and you're sending from within their ecosystem and across their infrastructure. And I know that there are some apps that are specific to healthcare that have security measures in place that will handle it on both sides. You just get into the challenge, especially with patients and folks outside your network, of kind of upselling them on installing this new app. It is a convenience factor. It just you have to be safe about doing it. And I mean, in terms of the larger question this opens about mobile apps and I think mobile in general, be careful about how these applications are tearing this stuff down. When you close it, what is it doing with any residual information that's on there? Don't think that just because it's a mobile app, you don't have to go through the same evaluation process. It's important to keep that up and apply the same sort of criteria.
And sorry, guys.
Amy, Amy, are you there?
I muted Amy from Houston, but Amy, thanks for being our J-Law. We appreciate that.
Right.
I have
Thanks
another.
so much.
I have another. Thanks for playing. I have another. I have another Amy. Amy from High Point, New Jersey. Let's see if I can unmute her. Amy, are you there? Amy from High Point, New Jersey. Let's see here. She will also have to call in and get an audio pin, so I'm going to wait there for a second. So we may have to come back with her. All right.
Hey, let me touch on one thing while we're waiting for the second Amy. Let me touch on the first Amy about how do vendors play in this? One of the things that's interesting about this is that where do BAAs come into play, like when you're talking about texting solutions? Remember, BAAs have to be signed by anyone where they're processing, viewing, managing, storing protected health information. But the pipes between here and there do not have to be covered by a business associates agreement. In other words, if you have Verizon phones, you don't have to go to Verizon and say, hey, for Verizon, sign this BAA. And I think as a rule of thumb, if you're buying an application that runs discreetly on your system, but it provides the security of encryption, but they're not, otherwise storing, the data, then you would not need a protected health. You not need a business associates agreement in that instance. If a client if a covered entity, let's say, licenses software and they run it on their own servers, they run it on their own servers, maybe it involves the use of protected health information. Whether you need a BAA really does depend on how that vendor is intersecting with the protected health information. So I may have made things less clear than more clear, but it's not obvious to me that in all cases you'd need to go to that texting vendor solution and have them sign a BAA, I guess is my point.
Right, right.
I would think that would be true, Steve, in cases where you have a vendor who is strictly piggybacking on the communications layer from the underlying telco provider.
Right.
So
right.
in this case, if they're just sitting on, like you said, the Verizon network, those transactions from a phone up to the network, those are over. All of the data transmissions are encrypted by default between those mobile handsets and the mothership, so to speak. I guess it just gets into questions about, if you're using that just as a transport layer and you have that application, how temporally are you storing that information on the device? Is it something like a Snapchat that just disappears within, a matter of seconds, or is it something where I'm pulling it down and it's a longer storage period? Once we get into questions of, how long it's staying resident on those machines, that's where you, I think, start having questions.
Yeah, I've actually seen a texting solution where they also allowed, there was a portal piece of it where you could go and pull at, look, import, export, load, the actual payloads of those texts. Obviously, and that was happening in the cloud. Obviously, that is that vendor would need to sign a business associates agreement because they're storing the protected health information. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I would think any time with a texting solution that you have a history that persists on the sending or receiving side, you need to take a look at it.
Yeah, if it stays on the device, that's its own set of security issues like that. I recently was with a client where the person had hundreds of pages of protected health information on their mobile phones because of the way they were set up to operate, and obviously that in and of itself, apart from the BAA discussion, that's something that has to be considered and documented in a risk analysis. So.
Yeah.
Amy from High Point, are you on the line with us? Oh, she's not there. All right. While we're again, hopefully we'll get one more question from the audience, a live question in before we wrap up the chat.
Come on, somebody. Live question from the audience.
I'm going to go back to sort of cloud backup. Oh, did I hear Amy? Hello?
Amy.
Nope.
Who's that?
That must be somebody else. Amy? All right.
Amy? Okay.
Yeah, she's definitely there. Amy.
Somebody's there.
Amy from High Point, are you there? Hi, Amy. We can hear you.
I think Amy's cat is there. Amy's cat is on the keyboard of Amy.
Amy from High Point, are you there?
She may not know we're on.
I can hear her typing. I think she's answering email. All right.
Okay.
All right. So I'm going to have a cloud question, cloud backup question. For offsite cloud backup, what questions would I ask for HIPAA compliance for BAA protocols and audit trails under the HIPAA Omnibus finalized last year?
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of nuance to that question.
There's a lot of nuance. Yeah.
Yeah.
Omnibus was, of course, 4 rules in 1. It's a big deal.
Yeah. Omnibus. Okay. First of all, so the main portion, the main way that Omnibus intersected with the business associates is it clarified in very important ways who was a business associate. And so for example, they made it clear that if you store protected health information, you're a backup vendor and you store protected health information, even if the data is encrypted and you can't technically get at it, you still are a business associates agreement. You still are a business associate and have to sign a BAA. It also clarified that any downstream vendor of the business associate who's interacting with PHI is also a business associate and has to operate in the same terms that the upstream business associate does. But I think the key question, again, the main and first question you have to ask is, will the vendor sign a business associates agreement? And in that, based on the current language that's required in a business associates agreement, you need to have language that says, hey, you also agree that any of your downstream vendors are compliant. So that's contained in the language of that agreement that they're signing. And then you get to, again, this question that we kind of have been dancing around is, how much more do you want to go with those vendors to make sure that they're compliant? And the answer to me is not perfectly clear. I mean that, you know, it's for some, all they care is the BAA, and they never look beyond that. For others, you know, for others, they want them to fill out like an annual questionnaire and say, you know, here's what you do. I actually have a BAA questionnaire I've started to use with some of my engagements. I will tell you that one interesting point is that I would caution against covered entities exerting too much control over their business associates. And the reason is that it can actually you know, it can actually increase your liability because of, this is getting way too wonky, but because of a principle of agency, which was also something that was in the omnibus rule. And so there's this, you want to find the balance between oversight but not acting as where your business associates are basically acting as your agents, and you tell them all the rules that they have to apply and all the policies they have to have and all the procedures they need to use. That's, you know, that can actually increase your liability too. So I don't know if that answered the question or not, but it was something, I guess.
Yeah, and
so and if I could add to one thing that
absolutely.
Steve was saying, you know, I know that again, I keep hitting on this one, but use what you know in terms of evaluating these folks. It's certainly true that there are vendors out there who are going to walk in the door with the BAA in hand, but as you look over the safeguards that they have in place and the policies that they've implemented, if you see something that doesn't smell right to you, you know, even though they're willing to sign it, at the end of the day, if there's a problem down the road, while they're going to take the primary responsibility for it, much of that is certainly going to fold over to you in terms of damage to reputation and everything else. So,
yeah, it's going to flow up
just
straight.
walking in with the BAA is certainly not. I think that should be a great starting point, but not the end-all, be-all.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, you know, have those conversations. Talk to folks and see what they say. I think the other challenge, especially with backup, because you know these days backup just includes file storage systems online, places like Dropbox and other providers, and you really get into a policy question with your employees at that point, members of the organization itself, and it becomes really an awareness issue to say, look, we have selected a specific vendor. You can't just use Dropbox because it's easy and you have it on your phone and you need to get a file back to your house.
Right.
You know, making sure that everyone is aware of and adheres to those policies is certainly important in that arena.
And actually, following with what Rob said, this is one where we can be super clear. Dropbox is not compliant.
Right.
You cannot use Dropbox. They will not sign a business associates agreement. Their technical architecture, all the header data is not encrypted. So, you know, and I will say this is a big problem because people love Dropbox. I love Dropbox. But you can't be using it with PHI.
Gentlemen, Amy from High Point, New Jersey is back with us. So I'm going to unmute her, and we're going to, she said, she apologized. She said life as an IT person. That kind of made me laugh. But Amy, you're on HIPAA Chat with Steve and Rob. How are you?
Hi, I'm sorry. We had a technical issue, emergency I had to take care of.
We thought it was your cat. We thought it was your cat, Amy. We thought
your cat or maybe some emergency construction in your office.
I think it's your name. I apologize.
No problem.
No problem.
The question that we've had, through a lot of webinars I've been on, are hearing, of course, the security analysis is the one that is causing a lot of meaningful use failures.
Yes.
And when I read the certification and standards criteria that CMS puts out, I kind of got the impression that it was just for information it said created or maintained by the certified EHR.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I get on a lot of these webinars, I hear people discussing that we need to be doing a full security scope down to physical entry devices, anything that possibly contains PHI. Is that true to meet that measure satisfactorily?
It is true. I wish I could tell you differently, but my go-to, I get asked this a lot, and there was a lot of misunderstanding around this kind of early on, and actually the Office of the National Coordinator clarified this issue in their document that's called the ONC's Guide to the Privacy and Security of HIT, and they have a security myths and facts table on page 11 of that document, and they address that directly. You actually need to inventory all the assets within the organizations that are processing electronic protected health information. So this wouldn't just include computers running your EHR or practice management solution. It would include, as we've talked about, phones and mobile phones. Copy machines is actually used as an example in that document. Of course, there was the big breach last year with Affinity Health with their copy machines. So your procedure really does need to incorporate all the different assets that are touching protected health information.
Yeah, I think that's especially a big challenge within the mobile space because it's such an open frontier. I think as you're taking a look at that, certainly mobile is lagging behind in a lot of the common applications that we use every day in terms of addressing security and how information is stored and retained, whether information that's cached during an open and active session is erased on closing the app, or whether it stays around forever and can be accessed. It definitely opens up a big can of worms.
Yeah, great. Amy, thank you so much for asking your question.
And yeah, hey Rob, let me key off of that too. I mean, you pointed out something too that's like one of the reason I'm such a big fan of virtualization is because so when I go in and I'll say, so first of all, there's fat clients and thin clients, and in a fat client environment you have the application running on, let's say, that laptop, and people say, yeah, but everything's saving to the server, Yeah, but data's still caching on that local machine, and that's one reason I'm a fan of like virtual environments, like a virtual desktop environment, is because at least for the applications that are in themselves, you could still potentially save stuff onto the local drive, but data's not being cached local. It's not even really touching that machine unless you actively save it. Right. And I'll say this, one reason I'm a big fan of thin client devices like the WISE devices is because we know that there's no data being saved on those. You don't even have the capability to save them locally. So so anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think certainly with some of the functionality that Apple's introduced in iOS 8, they're calling it enterprise security measures, but increasingly, certainly with our customers, what we're seeing is folks having the equivalent of a local virtual machine that operates within an encrypted and a secure sandbox on the mobile device itself. They have specific applications that will run within that environment. It has specific disk space to write to. Everything is written there encrypted. So there are options out there. You just need to be aware when you're looking at it that there's a lot of variety in terms of what you're going to find. And security protocols are people played fast and loose with them for a while. So just be careful.
We have 1 minute to go, and I just want to let our audience know that if we didn't get to your question, and we didn't get to many of them, please shoot an email, use HIPAA Chat in the subject line to Steve and Rob. George Clooney and Brad Pitt will not email you back, but I'm pretty sure that that Steve and Rob will. So,
yeah, well, our avatars, we might have an avatar representation. That
right,
will,
right, but it will not be George and Brad. But I don't think George and Brad know much about this topic. So, gentlemen, thank you so much. We'll get the recording out to all the registrants. Again, please shoot them an email with any questions on this topic. They are the experts in this game, and we will obviously get ready for next month's HIPAA Chat on a new topic. And till then, I hope everybody has a great day.
Thanks. This has been fun.
Yeah,
Rob,
thanks, everybody.
Great. Thank you. Okay.
And thanks
Thank you. Everybody have a good weekend.
And thanks to our two Amy's. Yeah.
Yes, to our two Amy, absolutely. Yes. So next month it'll be Steve's. We'll take a question from Steve's or, no,
Dan's or
Dan's.
Dan's, yeah.
Dan's,
Have a good day.
So, okay, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.